So Keith, it was, 31 years ago, your first show?
My first show at Petzel was in 1993.
Yeah.
That was the second show.
So it seems really interesting, this project. Like, could you talk a little bit about some of the impetus of it? I know the story, but like, kind of get your take on sort of how this came to be like.
Mm-hmm. Well, so the structure on the outside is it's what's called a mother mold, and it's basically this shell that would be used in the mold making process to cast a sculpture. Like initially, this was used to in 2000. I did a project in Los Angeles with the actress Farrah Fawcett, and she made a bronze, which ended up being a bronze sculpture of me. Mm-hmm. But there's a clay model that was made first, and that was molded, right? And so, in order to do that, there was like silicone, like the sculpture was done, the clay sculpture. Clay was put on top of it. This fiberglass thing called mother mold was made. Clay was removed. Silicone was poured into the cavity, right? And then you cast wax, and this was like the lost wax process that's been used for centuries for bronze. That's how that was done. So I had this mold hanging around since now going on 20. What was that? Since a long time. Mm-hmm. And I got interested in the silicone that was used kind of deteriorated. I got interested in this form, and a lot of my work has to do with kind of this idea of regenerating itself, like this idea of a form being born, like this birthing aspect. Mm-hmm. I guess I'd done this piece of my mother pregnant with me in, like a number of years ago, wearing this Jackie Kennedy pink suit, Chanel-inspired suit from the assassination. I got interested in this idea of something, sculpture giving birth to another form. So that was some of the impetus. I had this thing laying around and in storage, and then we've known each other now since was it 98 or something? 20. So, yeah. And you worked on this. We helped me. Well, we didn't help, but you were the director of photography and for the project. And so this was kind of like a connection that we had, and then this would have been 2022. I realized we both had a bunch of stuff going on in our life, but we started talking and got this dialogue going, and one of the things that was coming up, I was kind of also interested in exploring. I had done all this digital work in the 1980s, right? Some virtual realities, early virtual reality stuff, and I'd done like some scanning and printing way back in like 1990, I think. But so I was aware of like this digital aspect of how that could get brought into sculpture, mm-hmm. But it was mainly through my relationship of being in the film business and special effects.
Yes,
right. So it was like 88, I think, 1988, where I saw this first 3D. Wouldn't have been called a print then, but a rapid prototype of wax. It's from this remake of the movie The Blob. Mm-hmm. And there's a place in California, Monterey, California, called Cyberware, which is the only place that had 3D, well, maybe not the only place, but movie business used this place to scan actors, like so Terminator 2, The Abyss, all these things, early 3D scans. And I realized, wow, you can scan an object and then you can get it printed. And this thing from The Blob, a friend of mine had it was to make a scale figure. So they scanned the actor and then they printed at small scale. So wow, this is cool, And also like this kind of pointing system had been used. Since the Renaissance, it was like scaling up a model. But this was like the digital. I thought, wow, this is a cool way. And also playing with all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So it just took years to kind of, for that to kind of find its way back into my work. I started thinking about it a lot in earnest a few years ago, because I think also a lot of my work has to do with trying to revisit past moments of my own personal history and then intersect it with a bigger historical view of either art or culture or whatever. So I got interested in trying to like reinvestigate this early digital moment in this moment when everything was starting to explode, particularly in 2022, with the AI stuff. And I remember seeing in the summer of summer of 2022, one of these image generators, like on a New York Times article, and then I went to a talk, and I was like, whoa, this is like, it was like just mixing a cup with an avocado or something. It was like before it was available to the public. But then we started chatting about this thing, and you had some early
we started slaying around with it.
Of I think it would have been either Dali or Midjourney or something.
We were using both of those.
And we started playing around with, just what the possibilities of it, almost like literally just experimenting. And one of the things was your idea was to bring up the sculpture, the bronze sculpture, to use that as a primary, as a starting point. And
I think it changed. What was interesting, I think, is we were kind of going back and forth, and we were both kind of learning how the tools worked, and we were just talking. I was down where I live in Richmond, and you were up here in New York, and we were just talking on the phone, and texting back and forth, and sharing different images, and it was really interesting because some of the first things we did were, they look like a lot of those things. They just look kind of fantasy art-like, and they're just not that interesting. But then the ability to feed it an image and let it riff on an image became something that was really interesting to start to explore. And I think just looking at all the body of work that you've generated, all the pictures that I could just pull offline, from the gallery website or whatever, starting to feed those into it and to make suggestive, to suggest different ideas, things being built with different materials and stuff, like what did it look like? And you started to respond to some of those things, like, oh, this is kind of interesting, and then starting to make suggestions, and we kind of started just going back and forth. And some of the initial ideas, just because we've been friends for so long, some of it was just like trying to make you laugh, like trying to kind of make a goof with some of it. But that kind of led to like a
sculpture, like the bottle of tequila, something like that. So I guess it was like 2015, I did a show at Petzel called Regeneratrix, and I was interested in this idea of forms regenerating themselves, giving birth to themselves, this childbirth motif that was coming up a lot. And also this idea that more recently, and things that have been happening in my life in terms of getting older, people around me dying, so this idea of generational loss, and this idea, and that's also a term that's used a lot in video recording, but also in mold making, that you keep casting and you lose detail as the thing, makes copies and copies of itself. But so, I mean, just conceptually, I got interested in this idea of generative art, which corresponded at this time with kind of these experiments with these AI image generators and playing with images in my work, that you suggested, the bronze sculpture of this. It turns initially into like a bunch of absurd things, which are kind of funny. And I was actually trying to trace the source material. There's a site that I don't think is around anymore, but because all these data sets are getting big problems right now with copyrights and everything. But there was a site called Have I Been Trained? You could put in your image of your work and see if it would be used for any kind of AI. And so it brought up all these other things. And then at a certain point, I think we had this idea of like wanting to see what this thing would look like in glass or ice.
Yeah.
And because initially it was just this figure. And then it started generating all these forms around the sculpture. And I thought, whoa, that's kind of like a mold. And then that got me interested in this idea of this vessel that is basically, for black, it's a birthing vessel or something. It could, that could give form to a new form. So that's when that idea came.
Well, the fact that it's you can just call it
Mother, yeah, which is kind of a term that's been used like for I traced it back to I think the 19th century, but it is basically the shell that holds together something. So it is like this maternal space, like an egg. So I got interested in the whole idea. Also, all the stuff that we talked about, that like just feeling old or feeling like my body's falling apart, all this stuff. I thought it'd be interesting.
Like the ailing and sick parents.
Ailing and sick parents and all that stuff. So I got interested in this idea of, and just this joke. This idea when you're a broken person, you say, "Oh, I'm just a shell of my former self." Mm-hmm. So I got interested in that idea. It's just this, and it literally is. The extra is a shell of my. So this to me, like it's a negative, but of the sculpture of me as a 32-year-old. So then I got interested in using this form to make another sculpture. And last summer, 2023, at NYU, I had my body scanned inside, and then from that, it also, there's also this idea too that it was like also a learning curve with digital sculpture for me, because I mean, even though I've incorporated digital stuff in my work for decades, it's not like you can just scan something and print it. There's a whole process where it has to get modeled. So the scans weren't that great, and so that got modeled. It actually became a sculpture, a digital sculpture. We worked with this program called ZBrush. And so then that was, so this model was produced based on the scans and basically virtual sculpting. And then that was printed. And then the nature of the printing was such that we had something like, it's called a PLA printer. So it's a filament printer. It prints like little filaments of plastic, right? And so there's a certain limit to the size of the printer. And we've talked about this years ago too. It's like all this early digital, all these like there's just a whole like these maker bots and things that we could get at home. There are all these miniature things. It's like, well, why can't we do it at scale? Well, you can, but you have to turn it into like a puzzle piece and make pieces. So that's what. So we had all these machines running, these printers running, and so it was all put together like a jigsaw puzzle. And at that point, I decided to like embrace the seams in the way that the mold is the same. So it becomes a kind of a faceted thing. Mm-hmm. And then the color comes out. The color came later, and a friend of mine mentioned the sculpture of my mother, where I was pregnant. Well, I was pregnant. Well, my mother was pregnant with the fetus in me that was pink. That I have been using since a teenager. I worked at a dental lab, so it's a color that's used for dentures. Right. So that's kind of been the signature material that kind of represented the body, but it's like the body both inside and outside the body, that kind of thing. So that's what kind of then locked it into the thing. So, that's essentially the genesis of art, of the sculpture, the development of it, and led to this, and then then the great opportunity to show it, like also here back with Friedrich, after all these years, so it is something that started in 2000. 2000, it gets revisited, and just keeps going. So that's
great.